Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a good show for you today. We have longtime activist Dean Becker. He produces a number of radio shows, including on KBOO here locally, but he produces them from Houston, Texas. He'll be talking about his lifetime of activism and a recent video he's put together claiming the high ground, the moral high ground in the war on drugs. But first we have our hemp news that's coming, and as always we'll start out with our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight is from Washington, D.C. The top lawmaker in the United States Senate is again making clear that federal marijuana legalization is a priority part of his legislative agenda for 2021. In a fundraising email to his list of supporters on Friday last week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer laid out what he called Democrats' bold agenda for change this year. After describing plans to tackle climate change and income inequality, Schumer turned to cannabis. He wrote, "Next is criminal justice reform, and voters agree. Voters in 4 more states this election voted to legalize adult recreational use of marijuana, and that proves once again that it's past time to work to undo the harms done by misplaced priorities, particularly in Black and brown communities. It's time to decriminalize marijuana nationally," end quote, Senator Schumer said. Last month, the majority leader pledged that he, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden of Oregon and Cory Booker of New Jersey, would release a draft bill to end federal marijuana prohibition in the early part of this year. The 3 senators followed that up by holding a meeting with cannabis reform groups to discuss the plan. While it's not clear what the draft Senate marijuana reform proposal will be or when it will be released, Schumer said lawmakers are in the process of merging various pieces of existing legislation. The top Democrat also pressed Attorney General nominee Merrick Garland on respecting state marijuana laws during a meeting last month. Garland later said in his confirmation hearing and in written responses to questions from senators last week that he feels prosecuting people complying with local cannabis laws would not be a good use of federal resources. Of course, we agree. In New Mexico, members of New Mexico's House of Representatives last Friday approved House Bill 12 to legalize and regulate the use, possession, cultivation, and retail sale of marijuana for adults. The measure, approved by a 39 to 31 vote, would allow adults to purchase at least 2 ounces of marijuana at a time and cultivate up to 6 mature marijuana plants for personal use. Those who possess more than 2 ounces must lock it in their residence. Under New Mexico's HB 12, those convicted of an offense involving up to 2 ounces of marijuana possession would be eligible for automatic expungement, and those currently incarcerated for these offenses would be eligible for dismissal. New Mexico's bill will now be transmitted to the New Mexico Senate for further consideration. New Mexico's House Bill 12, one of 5 competing adult use legalization measures, is favored by advocates because of the additional social equity and community reinvestment proposals. The House vote came one day before the Senate Tax, Business, and Transportation Committee considered 3 additional measures to legalize and regulate marijuana retail sales. During the Senate hearing last Saturday, lawmakers discussed differences and similarities between the competing measures and indicated the need to quickly reconcile the differences and settle on a compromise before time runs out for the legislative session in New Mexico at the end of this month. New Mexico has a short legislative session with the legislature scheduled to adjourn for the year on March 20th. In both 2019 and 2020, New Mexico lawmakers advanced marijuana legalization proposals forward, but they ultimately stalled after crossing over the opposing chamber. Adult use legalization has also been a priority for New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham since she was elected to the office in 2018, campaigning on the issue and then subsequently appointing a working group in 2019, which issued recommendations to New Mexico's lawmakers on how best to enact regulations for adult use marijuana. Statewide polling data shows that 72% of New Mexico voters said they favor a proposal to legalize, tax, and regulate cannabis sales. If you live in New Mexico, send a message to your lawmakers in support of adult use legalization efforts. In Virginia, the Virginia legislature sent a marijuana legalization bill to Governor Ralph Northam's desk. The House and Senate approved the compromise legislation negotiated in conference committee after both chambers had previously passed their own versions earlier this month. Next, the governor is likely to send amendments back to the legislature, which can then approve or reject them, and then it'll go back to his desk for his signature to become law. Across the river up north in Washington State, the state Supreme Court overturned the state's criminalization of drug possession. The Seattle Police Department responded by saying having drugs, quote, is no longer an arrestable offense, end quote, and prosecutors are dropping cases. The ruling comes as state lawmakers are already advancing legislation to decriminalize all drug possession cases. In Connecticut, a long hearing by the Connecticut Legislature's Judiciary Committee indicated that Governor Led Lamont's marijuana legalization proposal is likely to be amended to address concerns that equity advocates have raised about its provisions. And from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., marijuana sales will be legal in the nation's capital under a new bill filed by Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. The legislation comes as Democrats take full control of Congress, which bodes well for removing a federal rider that's blocked local cannabis reform. They passed it by initiative back in 2016, and they haven't been able to implement legal sales because of the federal legislature. In South Dakota, members of the South Dakota House of Representatives voted 40-28 in favor of House Bill 1100, which significantly delays the implementation of Measure 26, the medical cannabis access law that was overwhelmingly approved by voters last November. South Dakota was the only state that passed marijuana legalization and medical marijuana at the same time last November. As passed by voters, Measure 26 is directed to take effect on July 21st, 2021. House Bill 1100, which is backed by marijuana prohibitionist Governor Newsom and other legislative leaders, pushes this timeline back until early 2022. As initially introduced, the bill sought to delay the law's implementation for at least 1 year. However, House lawmakers agreed to amend the bill, which now calls on regulators to begin issuing identification cards to patients no later than May 15th of 2022. South Dakota's House lawmakers rejected a separate amendment which was advocated by Measure 26's proponents that sought to provide legal protection for patients who possess medical cannabis prior to the new law's enactment date. So medical marijuana patients won't be legal there the earliest till May 2022. The South Dakota Senate also approved separate legislation establishing the framework for implementation of Amendment A, another voter-approved ballot measure legalizing and regulating the retail sale of marijuana for all adults. The fate of Amendment A remains unclear. Earlier this month, the Circuit Court judge ruled in favor of litigation backed by the prohibitionist Governor Newsom's office that seeks to nullify Constitutional Amendment A on the basis that it encompasses more than one topic and therefore violates the state's single subject rule requirement. Proponents of Amendment A are expected to appeal this decision. 54% of voters decided in favor of Amendment A on Election Day, while nearly 70% voted in favor of Measure 26 for medical marijuana. Republican Governor Kristi Noem publicly opposed both of those measures and is trying to stop their enactment. The will of the voters is clear. They want a legal marijuana marketplace and they want patients to be able to access medical cannabis as soon as possible. These cynical efforts to undermine and delay the enactment of these voter-approved measures is an affront to the very constituents that these lawmakers are sworn to serve. In Mexico, to the south, the United States. Now the legislature has until the end of April to legalize cannabis nationwide, and it seems next week's action will set the stage for Congress to make good on its obligation. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, for his part, said in December that a vote on legalization legislation was delayed due to minor mistakes in the proposal. He said, quote, "There's no time to conduct a review," end quote, in the legislature before the prior December 15th Supreme Court deadline. But he noted that issues that need to be resolved are matters of form and not of substance. The Senate passed the legalization bill in November and transmitted it to the Mexican Chamber of Deputies. Several committees took up the bill, with the Human Rights and Budget and Public Account committees representing one panel that considered and advanced it just before the court granted lawmakers the latest extension request until April. While advocates are eager for lawmakers to formally end prohibition, they hope the delay would give them more time to try to convince the legislature to address their concerns about certain provisions of the current bill, namely the limited nature of its social equity components and strict penalties for violating the rules. In response to unofficial drafts of the legalization measure, there were obtained by advocacy groups. Regulation por la Paz said the proposal, quote, "give way to regulation designed as a way for the great national and international capital at the cost of the criminalization of the users, and that the draft legislation prioritizes the interests of the industry over the rights and needs of the Mexican citizenship," end quote. The Mexican Senate bill would establish a regulated cannabis market, allowing adults 18 or older to purchase and possess up to 28 grams of marijuana and cultivate up to 6 plants for personal use. The legislation makes some attempts to mitigate the influence of large marijuana corporations. For example, it states that the first 5 years after implementation, at least 40% of cannabis business licenses must be granted for those from indigenous, low-income, or historically marginalized communities. As lawmakers work to advance the reform legislation, there's been a more lighthearted push to focus attention on the issue by certain members of the legislature and the activists. That push has mostly involved planting and gifting marijuana. In September, a top administration official was gifted a cannabis plant by a senator on the Mexican Senate floor, and she said she'd be making it a part of her personal garden. A different lawmaker gave the same official, Interior Ministry Secretary Olga Sanchez Cordero, a marijuana joint on the floor of the Chamber of Deputies in 2019. Cannabis made another appearance in the legislature in August when Senator Jesus Rodriguez of the Morena Party decorated her desk with marijuana plants. Drug policy reform advocates have also been cultivating hundreds of marijuana plants in front of the Senate, putting pressure on legislators to make good on their pledge to advance legalization. On our southern border with Mexico, marijuana seizures along the southern border have fallen over 80% since 2013, according to data published this week by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. In the agency's 2020 National Drug Threat Assessment publication, the authors write, quote, "In U.S. markets, Mexican marijuana has largely been supplanted by domestic-produced marijuana. In 2019, U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized nearly 249,000 kilograms of marijuana along the southwest border, a decline from over 287,000 kilograms in 2018. The Customs and Border Patrol marijuana seizures along with the southwest border have decreased more than 81% since 2013, when almost 1.3 million kilograms were seized," end quote. Marijuana seizures at the southern border reached an all-time high in 2009 when 4 million pounds of cannabis were confiscated by federal agents. The dramatic shift in cannabis supply chains a welcome development, as reformers predicted, such as us, here on this show. When given the option, consumers choose their cannabis to be grown in the United States. States' decisions to legally regulate cannabis has, as expected, led to a precipitous drop in demand for imported cannabis and has significantly disrupted the illicit cannabis market in Mexico. These are important developments to emphasize, and additional states continue to discuss replacing cannabis criminalization with policies that seek to legalize and regulate the marijuana marketplace. In Morocco's Council of Ministers proposed to legalize cannabis this week. The Council will approve the bill next week, confirming that cannabis will indeed be legalized in Morocco. Details of the draft bill have been leaked ahead of the official decision on the matter, with the Morocco news outlet Morocco Today publishing some of the details on the proposed path ahead. According to the Moroccan press, the draft bill proposes to build a legal cannabis industry by organizing cannabis farmers into cooperatives, which in turn would sell their crop to local or international processing companies. The draft bill reveals the scale of Morocco's cannabis industry, which officials believe to be $15 billion annually. Those profits mainly flow into the coffers of organized crime and drug traffickers today. Under the current illegal status of cannabis, farmers earn a combined $500 million, while drug traffickers earn nearly $14.5 billion. Morocco appears to intend to create a new model that's based on farmers' cooperatives while tightly controlling what happens to the crop. The draft bill does not propose to allow cannabis production across Morocco. Only in the 6 regions in the Rift Mountains that currently have a special status will be allowed to produce legal cannabis. According to the leaked bills, Morocco will require cannabis farmers to acquire a license and be of Moroccan nationality and at least 18 years of age. The National Agency for the Regulation of Indian Hemp Activities would monitor and regulate Morocco's cannabis trade, and hopefully it will pass. In Montana, in November, 57% of Montana voters decided in favor of Initiative 190 to legalize and use possession, cultivation, and retail sale of marijuana for adults. Since I-190 went into effect on January 1st, 2020, there have been several attempts by lawmakers to impose delays and other restrictions on the voter-approved law. In addition to the legislative attempts to restrict the will of voters, I-190 is currently facing a legal challenge in court on behalf of the opposition group Wrong for Montana. Their lawsuit claims that the initiative language is unconstitutional because it earmarks a portion of tax revenues from marijuana sales. The plaintiffs argue that only the legislature can determine how tax revenue is spent. The suit seeks to void the entirety of the initiative language, not just the portion of the initiative relative to tax revenues. Litigants filed a similar legal challenge just prior to the election, but Montana's Supreme Court declined to hear that at the time. Our last story tonight is from Madison, Wisconsin. Madison's new 2320 cannabis ordinance allows possession and consumption of cannabis in the. We're still working on legalizing marijuana across the country, and we're helping medical marijuana patients as well. If you or a loved one are looking for help finding a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States, then we have a physician referral service. Just call our office at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. If you have any other questions, give us a call as well. So now we'll go into our interview with Dean Becker. Stay tuned and help us restore hemp. I would like to introduce Dean Becker from Houston, Texas. Dean is a longtime activist, and Dean, welcome to Cannabis Common Sense.
Oh, Paul, thank you for this opportunity. It's always great to, dissect the drug war and kick it in the teeth.
That's true. You have been doing broadcast on public radio out of Houston. I know it even plays here in Portland on KBOO. You have several shows. I don't want to miss anything or mess it up. You want to talk about your broadcasts on public radio?
Sure. We're based at KPFT here in Houston, one of the 5 Pacifica sisters. And this October will make 20 years that I've been doing these broadcasts. We just went over 8,300 of my radio programs because we produce a program every day of the week called the 420 Drug War News, which is distributed. And then each week I do a half hour called Cultural Baggage. And for years I did another show called Century of Lies. But for the past about 5 years, my good buddy, our good buddy, Doug McVeigh has been producing Century of Lies for us as well. Now, we have interviewed well over 3,000 individuals. At this time, I've traveled the world. Basically, I've gone to South America and Europe, and went to Canada, tried to learn from all the people making progress, the safe injection sites in Canada, the decriminalization that's going on in Portugal, and the heroin injection program that's working quite well in Switzerland as well. And I got to talk to the leaders of each of these organizations and learn from them. And I feel, fortified to know I've learned from these thousands of people the truth about this drug war.
Yeah, and you've recently produced a compilation of a number of these people. I think it's 19. The moral high, how to win the moral high ground in the war on drugs. Did I get that right?
Well, that's close, yeah, and claiming the moral high ground. And
Yes.
it does feature 19 individuals, including the drug czar of Portugal, who's I now consider him to be a friend. We've met in Portugal several times, went to dinner a couple of times, interviewed him in his offices, and then we've done a couple of videos.
What's his
Uh,
name?
Dr. Zhao Gulao. He
Okay.
is the designer and the current drug czar of Portugal. And while I was there, and I should back up just a little bit, the reason I went to Lisbon, Portugal, was at the invitation of the European Monitoring Center on Drugs and Drug Abuse. I was invited there by their top scientists to give a presentation to the administration and the top scientists of the European Monitoring Center. While I was giving the presentation, the police chief and the police commissioner showed up during the presentation, and it was amazing the response, the embrace I got for the words I shared, the fact that the drug war makes no sense, it never has, it never will. The police chief and the police commissioner and I stayed after my presentation and laughed and joked for about another hour about how stupid and insane this drug war is. I was privileged to then go to Switzerland, where I met with Dr. Christoph Birki, who was the designer of their heroin injection program. While there, I got to tour the heroin injection facilities, got to learn during their now more than 20 years, they have made it possible for heroin users to inject pure heroin more than 20 million times with zero overdose deaths. Once again, proving the fallacy, the frailty, the futility of our drug policy, which ensures ever increasing numbers of overdose deaths and disease. We have done it so wrong for so long, it's become a quasi religion, a belief system that so many people think is necessary and that it needs to last for eternity in order to protect our children. When the truth be told, this drug war ensures that the drugs are ever more deadly and the number of overdoses will continue to increase.
Yeah, it's clear it was misguided at best, and I've often said that the real reason behind drug prohibition is money and power and the centralization of those two, and that seems to be the case to me. So
Sure.
you came to this from a different angle. Can you tell our before you started producing media and became an activist? Tell us about your background, Dean, because I know it's pretty unusual for many of us.
Well, I don't know. I'm a baby boomer. I've been everything from a bricklayer to a roofer to a machine inspector to lathe running a lathe. But I guess what maybe you're pointing to is I was a cop. Is that what you're
Yeah,
speaking of?
that's what I meant. I meant you're a cop.
I was a cop. I had the good fortune during one of my junkets, if you will. I have been to well over 120 conferences and seminars and gatherings of drug reformers and not so drug prohibitionists over these decades. And when I was in, let's see, it was New Jersey, about 2002. I was doing an interview with a gentleman named um, Jack Cole, who was the founder of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And in the middle of his interview, I learned that I was eligible to become a member of LEAP. And so I joined LEAP right in the middle of that interview. And the fact is, you have to have worn the badge sworn to uphold the Constitution of these United States. And I'm still trying to uphold the Constitution because I know this drug war, these laws are unconstitutional, irrational, and they empower terrorists if they're brave enough to grow flowers on some distant mountainside. They enrich these barbarous cartels south of our border that kill tens of thousands, butcher tens of thousands of people every year. And it gives reason for these violent gangs that prowl our neighborhoods with high powered weapons, selling these ever more contaminated and deadly drugs to our children at a 17,000% markup. There is nothing rational, logical about this drug war. And I spend my time chasing down, the powers that be, the attorneys general, the drug czar, the head of the DEA, those who proclaim the knowledge, certainly, who claim the intellect, who claim the ability to declare this drug war necessary for eternity. And they run from me. They run from every member of LEAP. There is no one who can defend this policy. And we just need the opportunity to prove that in an open public venue, in a courtroom, in a major newspaper, through a debate of some kind.
Yeah, we've obviously been winning those debates, and finally, we've got a strong percentage of public opinion behind marijuana legalization. So, but back to your years when you were a cop, were you in the Houston Police Department,
No,
or where?
Paul, I was a security policeman, U.S. Air Force.
I,
Um,
s- I s-
Mostly, I was guarding nuclear weapons was my main job back then. But gate duty and whatever. The one thing I did learn is that drunks are the worst people to deal with. People on drugs, they usually go along to get along, but drunks, they object and make your life miserable as best they can. And I guess what I don't know. I don't feel I'm a complete hypocrite in saying this, but I feel that alcohol is a much more deadly drug uh, in its pure form than are heroin or cocaine in their pure form. We very seldom ever see that. And in fact, the DEA says the best they ever find being smuggled into these United States is about 92% pure. I often wonder what that other 8% is, because that stuff's made in jungle labs and
yeah.
using kerosene and gasoline, and people stomp on it with their feet and squish it, squishing the leaves to get the juice out of it. Uh, who knows what bug feces fell in that product while it was out there in the jungle? 8% of it is not pure, and I don't know, probably not very good for you. But it's just another example of the current circumstance is used to justify doing more of the same thing. The overdose deaths are used to prosecute people. They're now talking about, people who buy a bag and then sell half of it to their friend can be prosecuted for murder if that bag turns out to be fentanyl and their friend dies. It's well, there's just no justification for this drug war. There's just not, and we, by that I mean activists, are beginning to develop the courage, the backbone, the stamina to speak more boldly, to challenge the logic of these people in those public venues, in the sessions at the House meetings and so forth, where uh, there is that opportunity. And don't get me wrong, I smoke pot nearly every day. I love edibles. I think marijuana is should be first and always, but it's not the only thing. And more marijuana activists need to get a little more bold, need to educate themselves a little more, need to use the fact that prohibition has never done anything it's was set out to do, and then we need to, I don't know, just challenge the logic of the drug war in general. Just north of you guys, there's something going on that really has me interested. The Washington Supreme Court is now
Yeah.
saying they no longer want people to be arrested for drug possession. Now, how that's going to be nuanced and handled, they even told the legislature, don't build another law. It's not necessary. So that,
Seattle Department just came out and said they stopped all drug arrests. They won't be arresting people for drugs anymore in the city of Seattle.
yeah.
Usually, it takes a little longer to get out to the more rural law enforcement agencies.
Oh, I'm sure it does. That's the same, certainly the same in Texas. And I think it kind of shows the unraveling of the logic, what we've been talking about, that who can justify what we've been doing. They can say it's the law, but the law, as they say, sometimes is an ass. And it has proven itself to be a complete ass, I think, over these decades, has it not?
Certainly has. Let me ask you, how did you come to find and become a marijuana user? When was your first? Was it before you were in the Air Force or
Oh
after?
yeah.
Or
Oh yeah.
I always,
I think my first time to smoke, and I've thought about this the other day. I'm writing a new book. It's basically I tried my damnedest, is what it is, and you didn't respond, is what it's about. But it's like this: that I was at a drive-in with some friends in Tulsa, in the years 1964, something like that. They're smoking something in the front seat. I'm in the back seat. What are y'all smoking? They gave me a hit. I didn't get high, but it was my first time to smoke, and then it was probably 6 or 8 months later, I finally located some in Houston. Been a regular, near daily user ever since. Um, Insofar as the Air Force, well, that was back before urine tests were much in practice, even.
yeah.
Um, and nobody really cared. I mean, mm, it was Vietnam era. And they talk about today's marijuana so potent we got to control it better. That's crazy. We had Thai sticks coming in from Vietnam, stuff that I wish the hell I could find right now. It was so powerful, so potent, so hallucinatory, and we still have reefer madness. It's a horrible beast. It needs a stake driven through its heart. It's just an ugly um, contraption.
What led you to start your media there with public radio? When did you
Okay. Okay.
come in creating?
Well, the year, let me think what it was, 1998, I guess. Um, I ran into a website, drugpolicy.org. I think, is that Cliff Schaefer's site?
Schaefer's Media Awareness Project, perhaps.
Well, okay, but he has a website. It's a big storage site of all the archives he has.
Yeah.
Um, and I ran into it. I was working at Chevron. I was working like a second shift where nobody's around. I started printing out all those documents late at night. I started reading them, and it had the early histories, it had the congressional hearings, the early newspaper accounts, all of this stuff that led us to this quote belief system. And I finally determined, well, it's a bunch of bull. There is no legitimacy to this. And I ran into a website, the New York Times Drug Policy Forum. It was an online forum where you would post something, someone else could respond to it. You could have kind of an ongoing dialogue, might take a day or a week. And while there, I was the first person to use my name. There were other people that were, Jimmy Joe and whatever that, posted there, but I put my name down, Dean Becker, and started speaking the truth that I had learned there from Cliff Schaefer's website. And I was invited by the New York Times to become liaison for their online forum. And while there, I used those credentials, if you will. I contacted Milton Friedman, who was the prize-winning, economist, well-known, well-respected. Got him to come on. Then Governor Gary Johnson, Ethan Nailman, a whole list of drug reformers. I invited them to come on. They would respond to questions and from other participants. And I built a massive booklet of those interactions. And I took it to Pacifica when I think it was early 2001. They were having a regime change, I guess if you want to call it that, where they were changing out the hierarchy and reinstituting new programs. And I brought in that stuff. I said, hey, I'd like to start a radio program about this. It's time. Well, a gentleman you may have heard of, Ray Hill, a big gay rights guy down here in Houston, who heard me talking to the administration, said, hey, I'll put you on air. He had a show. It's on every Friday night, still on Friday nights. It's called The Prison Show, where for the first half hour they do news and I don't know, just discussions with people in studio. And then the last half hour, they open the phones for people to call in and speak to their relatives and friends that are in prison. The 100, and I think at that time, 120 prisons in the state of Texas. And Ray said, I'll give you a spot right in the middle of my show. So I started doing a little 3 or 4 minute segment in the middle of the prison show. It went well. They gave me an hour show at 2 o'clock in the morning because I was so radical, that I used to open the show with this phrase, broadcasting from the gulag filling station of planet Earth. This is cultural baggage, because back then Houston was indeed the world's largest jailer. We had people being arrested by the hundreds every day on drug charges. Every morning they would have buses pull up to the jail and ship them off to other jails in other Texas cities, even into Louisiana. But they were sleeping under the bunks in the hallways. Eventually it changed.
I just want to throw in, I think it's George Floyd moved to Minneapolis to get away from the law enforcement of Houston. Isn't that correct?
It is correct. And it was, it served him for 20 years, I guess. Look, Paul, it's like this. Back then, Chuck Rosenthal was the district attorney. And about 2002, 3, I got a chance to interview him. He didn't know who I was. He had no clue. I showed up at his office downtown, started interviewing him. He was obviously toothless, hopeless, had no idea how to answer my questions. Mr. District Attorney, do you think we made any difference in the drug war in the last 5 years? Well, I don't know. Do you think we'll make any difference in the next five? Well, I don't know. He quit about 6 months later due to his own drug addiction problem. Now, this this leads to now it was a long time. Year was December 2014. I'm interviewing then police chief Charles McClelland, and I have this way of doing interviews where if A is true, then B certainly has to be true. And if B is true, then C. And I got to about if L is true, then M has got to be true. And he says, you know, this is just a conjecture, but he said, you know, you're absolutely right, Dean. The drug war is a miserable failure. That night, the 6 o'clock news in and around Houston carried that segment. It's the only time they've ever done it for my radio show. The newspaper carried it 6 different times, op-eds, editorials, etc., talking about what the police chief had said. The police chief was named head of the nation's police chiefs. He was quoted internationally on that one quote, the drug war is a miserable failure. And every district attorney, every police chief, every sheriff since has come on my show and has embraced that very idea. And it's now 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the now current district attorney, when she took office, I'm no longer going to arrest anybody for marijuana under 4 ounces. She says, I'm not going to arrest anybody for these minuscule portions of cocaine or heroin left in a baggie. We're going to do away with that. And she saved the city tens of millions of dollars in doing so. She's been respected. Other DAs around around Texas are doing the same thing now. And, it feels good to know that as of now, last time I talked to Kemog, our DA, she said there's been 14,000 of these people that did not get arrested for those 4 ounces or less that were found in their car. And I only wish that the 14,000 of them would join forces with me and help move this even further down the road, because they ought to be thankful. I know I would have been if I'd avoided my 13 arrests that I got busted for when I was a kid.
I agree. You know, it's hard to get them to know. That's why we're putting this out there. You know, I was born in Houston. I didn't grow up. I grew up in Dallas, but I have a Texas background and visit there quite frequently. But I was there for the big freeze there last month. I know you got pretty cold in Houston.
Oh,
But, so let's go back to your show, Claiming the Moral High Ground in the War on Drugs. We talked about some of the people that were interviewed, and I know we wanted to focus on a couple and show a couple excerpts from that. And
sure.
the person that came to my mind was Kevin Zees.
Well,
So
Kevin actually is the first one in the video. Um, it's odd. I talked to him about me being older and nearer to death than him, and yet it was him that not that long after our interview that he did die.
We went from town to town in Texas, from prison town to prison town, towns that were based on prison populations for their income. And we had this jail cell behind the trailer. We also had medical marijuana users in the trailer, in the van. People using marijuana medically in 2000 in Texas. Pretty amazing. So we had many conflicts with the police during that tour. And I'd get out and talk to the police, of course, keeping them out of our RV because we didn't really want them coming into the marijuana smoke. And no one was arrested. And in fact, we've discovered along the route, there was one moment where I was taking a break and our crew went out to tour a town and they got pulled over and I got a call that someone was in a police car. So I went out to the event, talked to the police, said, look, we're just doing First Amendment stuff. This is our right to protest, our right to organize, to raise these issues. And then over the microphone of the cop was someone says, is that those people with marijuana leaves on their car? If it is, leave them alone, let them go. And we realized in the midst of the presidential race that George W. Bush did not want a focus.
I'm going to back up to the beginning. When I first got into being an activist, not just online activist, when I started being in the marches, in the streets, so to speak, was because of Kevin. Again, I guess the years maybe 2000. There's a situation in Tulia, Texas, where a rogue cop. Tom Coleman was his name. He busted about 40 black individuals for cocaine. He set each one of them up. He planted the drugs. He made the whole thing up, basically, is what it turned out. And Kevin and a group of, I think mostly Floridians, Jody James, others, Michael Crowitz, a lot of other folks showed up in Texas. And they had a couple of vehicles. One was an RV with on the side a big banner of people smoking weed. And they pulled behind that a quasi jail cell, kind of a cage looking thing that people would be in, striped suits and, protesting. And they made a tour of, I think it was 8 different of Texas prisons, protesting outside the prisons with bullhorns on top of their RVs. And when they went to Austin to do the parade, I met up with them again there. I saw them first in Houston, marched with them here. But in Austin, I drove that 3-hour drive. I committed to becoming an activist. And that day, it wasn't that big, 150, 200 people in the march, but I felt it. I knew it. I had to do it. And from that day forward, I have been an activist. I thank Kevin. I thank him in that video. I thank him for being so brave, because that's what it took back then. Texas, my God, if you had a bag of weed back in, let's say, 2002, you could go to jail for 10 years, depending on what county you're in. If you had a pound of weed, you might go away for 20. It was just prohibitionist heaven, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, I have a half brother who back in '69 was arrested with 2 ounces in Dallas, and he was sentenced to 5 years and spent 2.5 years in Huntsville before they let him out there. But
Yeah.
the laws are pretty strict. In fact, I first smoked marijuana in Texas back in 1972, I believe. I was 11 years old, and it was a Vietnam veteran who shared marijuana with me. At that time, if an adult shared marijuana with a person my age, then they could be sentenced to life without parole. At that point, you'd probably do more time for sharing marijuana with a minor than for murder. And that was during a period where, there was a pause on executions. There wasn't any death penalty for about 10 years there before the Supreme Court reinstituted it. But also, Kevin Zees also got me kind of involved in activism. I first went to a marijuana event, the Washington Smoke-In in Washington, D.C. in 1978. But then that linked me up with the Yippies. I became the Washington State Normal Coordinator in like 1981. And then I wrote a letter to Normal, and Kevin Zees was the executive director of Normal at the time in Washington, D.C. And he appointed me the Washington State Director of Normal as a student at Evergreen State College. And Normal sent me a big 16-millimeter reel of Reefer Madness. And I went campus to campus showing that, talking about how we should do an initiative petition to legalize marijuana. And it did. Eventually, that's what happened there in Washington and in Oregon.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to keep up. I think Vermont, West Virginia are 2 of the new states being bandied about as headed to legalization or increased legalization.
The Virginia legislature just passed a bill to legalize cannabis, and New Mexico's House of Representatives yesterday passed a bill to legalize cannabis.
Yeah, and this we mentioned earlier Washington State's Supreme Court, but what we didn't delve into much, and I'm not sure if it's going to be necessary or how it's going to interact with this, but I've been speaking with Roger Goodman. He's a representative up there in the House, the state of Washington, heads up their Public Safety Committee or Criminal Justice Committee, basically who they are. And they've been talking about decriminalizing all drugs, to put forward a new law to do so. And the Supreme Court may have beat them to the ticket. But the point I guess I'm trying to get to is that, Roger's been on my show a couple of times in this past month. We even last week, was it? In the last 2 weeks anyway, had one of his sessions within the House there in the state of Washington about this effort to decrim all drugs. And it's, we don't have that option here in Texas. It was about 1978 or something. There was a protest trying to get weed legalized. And it angered some of the politicians so bad they wrote a new law that makes it where we can no longer put forward a referendum in this state. That we could have put forward one to legalize, but it's not going to happen now because they took away that potential or that ability.
That's outrageous. That's outrageous.
But that's Texas, man. I mean, that's we have the most ignorant and bass-ackwards set of politicians. Not all of them. There are at least a half dozen, maybe a dozen, that are putting forward bills this session to legalize marijuana, to diminish the penalties, to nuance things that in the right direction. And chances are pretty slim. Earlier today, I called the state house, tried to see if they're now allowing people in, because the governor just took away the open up all buildings and take away the mask, which is the craziest freaking thing you ever heard. But if they're doing that, then I can get in the Capitol. Last time I was there, I knocked on 72 doors, in one day, and gave them. I was wearing my shirt, "Legalize heroin to save lives." It was a marijuana day, but that's me. There's enough people working on marijuana. I'm sorry, but I want to legalize heroin. I don't like heroin. I tried it a couple of times. Don't want anybody else to do it. But if it's going to be around, let's make it be heroin instead of fentanyl or some mixture of who knows, God only knows. And
So
the
many people are for that these days. It's really tragic. I know we all have been touched by this fentanyl opiate crisis, where this deadly drug is laced into Xanax or heroin or
it's
anything
in
else.
cocaine now. It's in cocaine. It's starting to show up in marijuana, they say. It's just, again, I my summation of the drug war: prohibition. All right, prohibition is racist, it's stupid, and at its heart, it's just evil. It's just a pretense. It's a hope for a better day that's just never going to come.
So we were talking about the video claiming the moral high ground.
Paul, the good thing is, of those 19 people that are in that claiming the moral high ground video, there is Dr. Gulau, head of the Portuguese drug czar, if you will.
Let me tell a very important argument from the right wing, from the conservatives. United Nations treaties. The United Nations will punish you, will blame you, will. In fact, we had that discussion in 2000 at the Parliament. It was approved, it passed, the bill passed, and came into force in the 1st of July of 2001. And what I can tell you nowadays, 20 years after, is that there is a complete consensus, complete political consensus nowadays. Even those parties who voted against the bill at that time are now in favor of our policies, because we have the evidence of the results.
We have a message from former president of Switzerland, Ruth Dreyfus, as well as many others. And I guess what I'd like to share with your audience is the fact that these people, I contacted them by email for this claiming the moral high ground. They both immediately responded, wanted to be a part of this under the title claiming the moral high ground. And 3 weeks ago, Dr. Dreyfus came back on my show, wanted to once again express her support for the work we're doing with this claiming the moral high ground. She called me a hero, for God's sake. And I guess what I want to say is that we do own that moral high ground. We need to embrace it, claim it, demand somebody try to challenge us for that perspective, for that position. And the one that I end this video with, the claiming the moral high ground, is my district attorney, Kim Ogg. She is the most open, bold, ready to, she doesn't mention the word legalized, but she has no respect for this drug war.
I can tell you that people who utilize drugs and do not participate in any type of violence pose the lowest threat to our community in terms of public safety. Many people are self-medicating because they have underlying mental health, even physical health issues. I think if you looked in a lot of old ladies' purses, you might find pills that weren't prescribed to them. Yeah. So it's the disparate enforcement that makes people so angry with the system. When we see more black and brown people, more men, more young people than old people being stopped, searched, arrested, it's not just disturbing, it is a threat to our whole democracy. People must believe our system is fair if they're going to keep participating in it. And I think that's why it's so important that the top law enforcement officials, myself, Chief Art Acevedo, Ed Gonzalez, all agree that social problems and ills are not appropriate for us to try and handle. Those are huge problems that must be dealt with through appropriate resources by our governing bodies and direct service to people. And that declaring war on people who use drugs has not just been a huge waste of money, but it's cut our nose off to spite our face as a society. Yep. You can't send millions of people to prison and refuse to see what has happened in our society as a result. A lot of lost opportunity and a lot of bitterness.
Dean, I know now that hemp is legal in Texas. I was in Texas last year for the Texas Hemp Convention in Dallas, which was kind of a apropos return home for me. But the law enforcement in Texas says they're no longer enforcing marijuana laws because they don't have the lab resources to tell the difference between hemp with CBD and cannabis with THC.
Right. No, this is true. I had a lengthy discussion about that with my district attorney, Kim Ogg. I was in her office last year talking about that very subject, you have to have some high-priced machine to actually do the analysis to compare hemp to cannabis. And it's a rarity and nobody really wants to spend that money. So yeah, it's true. Except if you're in...
You and I are talking about getting hemp, low THC, high CBD hemp to you for the production of Becker's Buds, a little pack of CBD strong cigarettes that would help with political activism there and maybe even raise a little money. I know there are hemp stores all over Texas today.
Well, the problem I ran into with that idea, Paul, was that that the governor made it where to sell pre-rolled pre-rolled hemp cigarettes would be against the law. Now, I know there are people that are doing it on a small scale, but I felt that if I were to do it on the massive scale I was hoping to, that it would be quashed in a hurry. So I didn't do it. But the heck of it is that my DA had indicated that we don't know how to tell the difference. I said, have you smelled it? Have you been around it? Have you sniffed it? She says, yeah, you can't tell the difference. And so the point being that we have this irrational fear of this plant.
Of THC.
No, but it comes back to that thought that reefer madness is just it's like one of those movie, I don't know, Chucky or something. It won't frickin' die. You cannot kill it no matter how hard you try, because someone can write a law or present a law and someone else is going to spout some bull that their granddaddy told them 50 years ago, and that'll be embraced as if it were valid and useful and truthful, when we all know, even the guy probably saying those words knows it's not true. But it's part of this idea that some people are susceptible. Some people need to be protected. Some people have this proclivity to hurt themselves or whatever, and we need to protect them. So we're going to write a law to protect those vulnerable few from what might happen if they were to do something we think is...
Yeah, so that some people can make some money and some people can put them into treatment and some people can be hired to lock them up and create more minions in their state system. It's a vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the harms of drug war are caused by drug war. I mean, it's that simple. It's a vicious, immediate cycle that it could and it should be easily exposed and ended. And perhaps what the Supreme Court started in Washington State is the beginning of that process, because they're basically saying
passed a law by the initiative process last November where no one can be arrested for possession of any drugs in small amounts.
Right, right. Which is makes all the sense in the world because what has it done? I mean, what have we ever accomplished or created or
Yeah.
gained?
Created the largest prison state in the history of the world with more people incarcerated per capita and in actual numbers than any other country. China has 5 times more people than we do, but we have more than twice as many people in jail as they do. And they're much quicker to execute people than we are as well. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's Paul. It's like I don't know. My show actually aired today. Excuse me. I interviewed two people from Normal talking about what was going on in Virginia and New Jersey, and also had an interview with Howard Wooldridge, who's a former cop, one of my compadres from law enforcement against prohibition. And we were just talking about how the the framework, the means of this drug war are dissolving. They're crumbling. They're despite the fact that we aren't having that debate, that like the Supreme Court in Washington and these legislators in other states are beginning to realize that you don't lose votes, you don't lose stature, you don't lose anything by speaking more boldly about the need to end this drug war because the people know it hasn't worked and that it's empowering terrorist cartels, gangs, ensuring more overdose deaths, children's access, violence, madness. That's what the drug war is, and people know that now. And it's easier for these politicians to step forward, except for those who, quote, made their bones 10, 20, 30 years ago by saying it's so necessary. We got to lock all of these people up and keep them for as long as possible, and so forth and so on. Those folks can't back down. They made their bones, but they're dying off. And, I a few years ago, I didn't think I was going to live long enough to see much of an end to this madness of drug war. But if I can hang on a couple more years, it ought to be a hell of a lot better. That's my theory.
it's starting to get better. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Thank
Yeah.
goodness. So, we're about running out of time here. What would you like to say in closing, Dean?
Well, okay. Given the opportunity to speak to everybody in America, I guess here's what I'd say. You own the moral high ground. You know the truth of this matter. You have the facts and the ammunition, so to speak, to contact your legislators, to any cop on the beat, to any and everyone in a position of authority, to let them know that you know the truth, that the drug war has not worked, is never going to work, is a failure, is a fiasco, and it needs to be ended forthwith. And um, the information is there. Go to my website, drugtruth.net. As I said, more than 8,300 shows that are available over the years. Go to Becker's Buds on YouTube. You can access many of my videos there as well. And just in general, stand tall. Speak from the heart. Speak with the knowledge that you've gained, and realize that there is nobody going to quash or counter your position because there is no legitimacy to this drug war. None. Never has been, never will be. And we own the moral high ground. That's out there at Becker's Buds as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Dean. It's great to have you on the show after all these years. We're going to have you back more often. I urge people to go check out that video that we've had clips of claiming the moral high ground and check out Dean Becker's website. Thank you, Dean. And thank you, viewers, and help us restore him.